You've got vision, you've got goals, but did you know there is one thing that will propel you to the next level faster than anything else? It's a personal growth action plan. And coming up next on the Successful Women Think Differently podcast, I'm going to show you how to create a personal plan of action to close your growth gaps faster than ever before. So, the topic I want to talk about today is one that really transformed everything for me. As I've coached others, it's transformed a lot for them. And it really is something very simple. So, I talked on the last episode about growth gaps, the fact that oftentimes we know what our goals are, our performance goals, those things that are easily measurable, right? How much money we're going to make or save, how much weight we want to lose, what job promotion we want, the business we want to launch, the relationship we want to have. Those are all very tangibly definable. But oftentimes we think the reason that it's taking a long time to get to such goals is because maybe we're not taking the right steps. But it's really much bigger than just knowing what steps to take. What is even more important is when it's time to take those steps and you get stuck, do you know what the growth gap is that is keeping you from moving forward, keeping you stuck? And typically it's fears, habits, distractions, sometimes circumstances, but ultimately it really is about the way you need to grow in order to go where you want to go. This changed my life like 15 years ago when I first heard about the concept of a personal growth plan, like you knowing exactly the ways you need to grow and having a plan of action to do that. So I just want to put this thought in your mind. What is your personal growth action plan? Because even though I know you've been successful in a lot of ways, there are probably some things that have felt elusive, some goals that no matter how much you research, how big your plan is, how many people you talk to, somehow you just feel stuck. You don't move forward. You don't do all the things in your plan. There are things that get in the way. If you knew what to do about that, if you understood how you needed to grow and you were able to grow in those ways, wouldn't it be worth it? So there are a few very simple things that we can identify that help us to actually put together our own personal growth action plan. There's 4, in fact, that I want to share with you. The idea here is that you are able oftentimes to coach yourself through any challenge by getting clarity about the ways in which you need to grow. So a personal growth action plan, very simply, number 1, it requires that you're able to identify your growth gaps. And sometimes this requires having someone else that's working with you to help you see things that maybe you cannot see. I have found even as a coach that sometimes there are things I see in others that I don't see as quickly in myself. And so having my own coach or a guide or even going through certain programs, I've been able to just open my eyes to things I could not see. Sometimes we know, like you may know that your growth gap is consistency, or it's the confidence that you need to build, or it is your fear of rejection and you just don't like hearing no. And if you could just grow through that fear and find your courage, you could have a breakthrough. So sometimes you know what the growth gap is, and sometimes it's hard to see it, and it's helpful to get another perspective. But the first step in identifying your personal growth action plan is identifying the ways in which you need to grow. And those are your growth gaps. What are they? Do you know? If you've got a list, is it complete? So number 1, identify your growth gaps. Number 2, you've got to learn what it takes to close your growth gaps. So it's not enough to know what your growth gap is, or if there are multiple ones, what your growth gaps are. But then you've got to go about the business of educating yourself, learning, acquiring the knowledge or the skills or the tools that help you be able to close that growth gap. That's a commitment to learning. It is a commitment to stretching outside of your comfort zone. It's a commitment to being okay with not knowing and not beating yourself up. I know for myself, sometimes I've identified growth gaps, and it can be easy if you're sensitive, particularly if you're sensitive to rejection, to start seeing ways that you need to grow and then kind of becoming defensive about it or feeling guilty that you don't already know something. When you embark on your personal growth action plan, you have to let go of judging yourself. Let yourself be imperfect. Give yourself permission to be human. Kind of throw up your hands and go, yeah, there's stuff I don't know, but there are ways I want to grow. And that means I'm going to show up with humility. I'm going to show up with this attitude of student so that I can take in what I need to take in, so I can get the knowledge and see the things I need to see. I can try things and not be good at them, right? A lot of times as we're growing and we're learning, that's exactly where we are. And if you've been really successful in a lot of ways, that can feel uncomfortable. But hey, that's a part of personal growth, right? Being uncomfortable, not knowing, and being willing to learn. Being willing to say, yeah, I'm a novice over here. I might be an expert over here, but over here, I'm getting better. I'm acquiring the knowledge. I'm learning new skills. This is about really having a growth mindset, right? A fixed mindset believes that where you are right now is set. Like everything you're going to know, the talent you have, the skills you have, they're set. But a growth mindset says where you are today is just a starting point. You can get better. In fact, you could shock yourself with what you are able to learn and with what your potential is if you are willing to say, yeah, I don't know that. What do I need to know? What do I need to learn? This can be true whether you need to grow in relationships because you find yourself getting stuck in a rut. This could be in a technical area at work. This could be something going on with your leadership or your communication ability. It can be in any area. But if you say, I'm not going to stay stuck with a fixed mindset, I want to understand how I need to learn, and you consistently take that action to learn what perhaps you don't know right now. Knowing that if you learn what needs to be learned to close that growth gap, everything could shift and change. So first, you want to identify your growth gaps, but number two, you want to learn what it takes to close your growth gap. Number three is about consistently taking action based on what you learn. It's not enough to learn what to do differently. You've got to do something different, right? You've got to do things differently. So this might involve coaching. This might involve self-coaching, some self-reflection, intentional action. Oftentimes, what we need is to experiment with trying something different. You learn a new skill. Let's say you're working on your relationship with someone very close to you. And previously, maybe you haven't been the best communicator, so you're learning some ways to communicate. You could literally experiment with it today or just this week and then go back and say, okay, how did that work out? So taking consistent action that allows you to learn from the actions that you're taking is powerful. And so very simply, in your personal growth action plan, it's action. It's not just knowing what your growth gap is, not just knowing how to close it, but actually starting to close it, starting to do things a bit differently, and then noticing how that impacts your ability to close that growth gap and get to the vision that you have for yourself. And then number four is something I talk about in an entire chapter in Successful Women Think Differently, which is don't go it alone. Community is so important. There's a lot of research around the power of positive peer pressure. meaning we know we know about peer pressure. Typically, when we think about peer pressure, we think about something negative. We think about kids and not wanting them to be around the kind of peers that influence them in a negative way. But as adults, we know that people are far more likely to make major changes when they're in a community of people moving in a similar direction. So whether this is a friend that's moving in a similar direction, or a small group, or an online community of like-minded people, you want to not go it alone. Now, some of not going it alone may be, the one-on-one, the mentor or the coach or the guide, but it's also the peers who are moving in a similar direction. Sometimes this means that we are limiting exposure to people who are not a positive influence or positive peer pressure, or maybe we're not talking as much about our growth gaps and our goals because we're not getting the encouragement needed. But even letting go or removing yourself from negative influences, even more important than that, is having positive influences. Others that you see trying, sometimes succeeding, maybe sometimes not succeeding, and you're not in it by yourself. You're not the only one that's struggling, and yet you can keep going. That kind of community is so very powerful. So your personal growth action plan, number 1, identify your growth gaps. Number 2, learn what it takes to close those growth gaps. Adopt a growth mindset. Let go of the fixed mindset. Where you are today is just a starting point. With effort, with learning, you can transform what happens. And so if you realize that you're open to learning new things, you realize you actually can. I don't care how old you are, how long you've been doing what you've been doing, you can choose and make a decision to do something different. 3, consistently take action based on what you are learning, even if that is experimenting and noticing how shifts in behavior change your ability to move closer to the goal, change how you feel, and change the results that you're getting. And then number 4, don't go it alone. Community is important. Be intentional about building the kind of community that pulls you forward, that inspires you, that encourages you. I have always, well, I won't say always, but certainly for the last 15 years or so, and even before that, before I labeled it a personal growth plan, understood that ultimately growth is the key to being able to move forward. And this is a big part of the reason that 3 years ago I created the Successful Women's Academy. And in fact, my own personal growth is leading to a bit of a shift right here with this podcast. We launched this podcast earlier this year. It has been amazing. I love the feedback. I love hearing from you about how this is serving you. And it's right at the core of my mission around inspiring women to live more fulfilling lives. So I love, love, love doing this podcast. And in my own personal growth, when I look ahead to what we're doing over this next year, I began realizing I had a bit of a growth gap. I'm a time optimist. I talk about time optimism. I tend to underestimate how much things take for me to get done. And doing this weekly podcast has been a challenge, especially doing it via video, where I've got to be prepared in a different sort of way, right? I got to look decent. I can't do it off the cuff as much. It's been really good, but I realized I've got to make a shift, and I'm going to experiment with something different going into this new year. So in this new year, I'm going to be doing the podcast monthly. You're still going to get this podcast. You're still going to get the 35 episodes we've done so far. But it's going to actually reflect what we're doing inside the Successful Women's Academy. So the podcast themes are going to reflect what I am teaching. I want to give you a preview, some access to what we're doing inside of our membership. And our membership is all about your personal growth action plan. Inside SWA, every single month, What am I doing? I'm helping you identify a specific growth gap each month. I'm helping you learn how to close that gap with a really powerful personal growth lesson and a virtual coaching session, which is super powerful. I'm helping you consistently take action and really do the self-coaching and the reflection that's needed with our Joy Journal every single month that reflects what's been learned in the personal growth lesson and in the virtual coaching session. And then there's that sense of community, our online community, which is so very encouraging. The women in SWA are phenomenal. They're phenomenal in their level of success and in their level of humility, of joy, their ability to support each other. I absolutely love it. And so every single month, we also meet live on Zoom to just undergird that sense of community. And we communicate out on the platform as well as on social media. So my goal when I created SWA was helping you create and sustain your own personal growth action plan. A big part of the consistent action that's necessary in a personal growth plan is knowing that you're consistently, week by week, month by month, moving forward. And so that's what we do. So if I can help you in that way, I want you to check out SWA. Just go to ValerieBurton.com. It's part of our membership, and you can get all the details there. But regardless, I want you to understand the power of having your own personal growth plan. I'd love to support you in that, but even if you do it on your own, I want you to remember you need to identify those growth gaps. You want to learn what it takes to close those growth gaps, then take consistent action based on what you're learning. And very importantly, have a sense of community. That positive peer pressure will move you forward. So I can't wait for you to join me in our next podcast in our new format, which is going to be audio, which is what a podcast is anyway. We only do the video on our YouTube channel. And thank you. Thanks for all your feedback. Thanks so much for helping me get this podcast off the ground and get it out into the world. You're sharing it, you're commenting, and your feedback has been absolutely phenomenal. I cannot wait to continue to serve you on the Successful Women Think Differently podcast. Thanks so much for joining me, and I am praying this coming year is your best year yet.